Maintenant la séance. Bienvenue à la réunion.
Welcome to meeting number 52 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, pursuant to Standing Order 108.2 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022. The committee is meeting to discuss air passenger protection regulation. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members are attending in person in the room or remotely using the Zoom application.
Today, via video conference for the last meeting on our air passenger rights study is from Canadian National Railway Company, Monsieur Olivier Chouk, Senior Vice President and Chief Legal Officer, Monsieur Martin Guimond, Vice President, Transportation, Eastern Region, and Mr. Huang TRAN, Director, Passenger Services. Thank you all for joining us today. We will begin with opening remarks, so I will turn it over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee for inviting us. I'm accompanied today by Martin Guimond, Vice President of Operations for CN's Eastern Region, and Huang Tran, Director, Passenger Services at CN. Before I go into details about the events of December 23rd and 24th and the extraordinary circumstances under which they occurred, I would like to say yet again that we at CN are deeply sorry for the impact that the derailment had on the travel plans of many Canadians during the holidays. CN has dealt with challenges of Canadian winters every year for 100 years. We invest annually in our network to build resilience, to keep our operations running, and to be able to resume operations following disruptions. We regularly adjust our practices to reflect the experience we have acquired, the major investments we make in our infrastructure, the increased training we provide to our employees, and the operational changes we made. A fluid, resilient network benefits all our partners, including VIA. By being prepared and investing across our network, we're better positioned to deal with the harsh Canadian winters. However, the winter storm that struck in late December was in a different category altogether. Much of Ontario's transport infrastructure was affected. Hundreds of thousands of Canadians were without power for several days. Ontario Provincial Police closed a number of major roads, including highways 401 and 402, and some regions in Ontario even declared a state of emergency. The extreme weather not only caused the events we are looking at today, but also hampered the efforts of the teams tasked with restoring train operations. The first incident occurred on Friday, December 23rd, around 10:30 p.m. when VIA Train 55 hit a tree that had fallen on the track near Cobourg. CN dispatched a crew to clear the tree. However, the position of the tree and the weather conditions made it unsafe to proceed. CN and Via Rail dispatched a Via Rail train to tow the damaged train. This was the privileged course of action because it meant that we would not have to move passengers in the middle of the blizzard. Unfortunately, that option was also abandoned due to concerns for passenger safety. As the Via crew was nearing their hours of service limits, the Via Rail train dispatched to tow Train 55 was sent to Toronto, and another train was dispatched to the site of the incident. Around 10:50 on December 24th, passengers at 10:50 a.m. on December 24th, passengers and their luggage were moved to a new train and brought back to Oshawa. And at 10:40 on December 24th, a second event that impacted rail service occurred. The derailment near Grafton, Ontario, completely shut down CN's corridor for 3 days. Train Q122 was in the process of getting out of the way for the rescue effort of Via Rail Train 55 when it collided with Train M305, which was parked on another track. As we explained in the brief submitted to the committee on January 23rd last, the operation was complicated by issues such as a limited access to the derailment site, road closures, high winds, limited visibility, and the location of the cars and locomotive. We should also keep in mind that one of the cars involved in the derailment contained dangerous goods. While no dangerous goods were released, these conditions required a number of precautions. We dispatched all available crews to clear the track so trains could go through, and our railroaders worked tirelessly despite the bad weather. And I would also like to thank local authorities and community members for their support. Safety is a core value at CN, and we learn from every incident. After reviewing the incident with VIA, we have identified opportunities to improve our communication protocols, and we have followed through with concrete measures. We pride ourselves on being particularly focused on serving our customers. Via Rail is no exception. We understand the role we play in moving the Canadian economy, and we are just as keenly aware of the role we play in moving Canadians. To conclude, Mr. Chair, I would like to thank you for giving us the opportunity to brief the committee. We're happy to be here. Thank you.
We will begin our line of questioning today with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's good to have you here today. I think the chair made it clear on one of our emergency meetings that we had hoped to have CN here earlier when VIA was here to talk about the incident, but we're glad, even though it's a bit delayed, to have you here today. I recognize the work that your crews do. I certainly saw that firsthand when we had our devastating flood and mudslides, washouts on the CN track, and the professionalism and the hard work of your crews to get that service back up and running in record time was certainly noted and valued by the community. And I think that knowing that was possible, I think made it difficult to understand. And you've given some context here as to the reasons, perhaps why there wasn't access to the stranded train. I asked, obviously, if you have problems on both sides of the incident, there's going to be delays. But I did ask VIA this question. I'm going to ask it to you as well. When a train hits an object on the track, there's a risk that it could have been much more serious than it was. I think the train did not derail. There wasn't a breach of passenger carriages, etc. But my concern after the delays in getting to the passengers or providing any additional services to them was that what would have happened had the situation been worse? What would have happened had there been a significant derailment or the carriages had been breached? So can you indicate, you said that crews were able to get to the scene relatively quickly and then were unable after that point to really provide any additional assistance. What would your protocols have been different? Would there have been more that you could have done if you had deemed the incident to be more serious than it was?
Thank you very much for the question. I'll hand it over in a second to my colleague Martin Guimond, the comment from an operational perspective, but there's no doubt that every situation is assessed on its own merit. We put the safety of the passenger in this case, and our crews as well, as a first priority. So as the situation is assessed to be more or less severe, the response will be adjusted accordingly. But my colleague, Martin Guimond, could provide you more context and color on this.
Merci, Olivier. Thank you for the questions. Every incident is a bit of different, and this one is really like understanding what really caused it and the type of situation we're working in. The first thing that when our crew arrive into a derailment situation or any other incidents that may impact our network and the fluidity of our network is how can we handle that in a safely manner. In this case, because of the situation and the tree that hit the VIA train and how it was deemed that it was not safe. And therefore, in collaboration with the RTC, which is our regional rail traffic control, and their discussion with VIA, it was decided to look at another means to rescue the people and to act differently in this situation because we wanted to prevent the safety of our employees, but as well the safety of all the passengers that were in the VIA train.
Obviously, rail safety, you take it very seriously. There are strict protocols in place for who can access a rail line and when. We obviously you have your own police force to ensure that occurs. When an incident like this happens, what are the protocols that are in place? Is there an agreement to immediately relax that to allow local emergency services to access a train, for instance, like this one, or like does that require a bureaucratic chain of command decision, or are there protocols in place that kick in as soon as an emergency is declared or an incident like this happens that would allow, for instance, the Cobourg Fire Department to access that train to provide services to passengers without back and forth with CN, or is that still part of the protocol, is that there has to be a check down, an agreement from the CN police or CN in some way to provide those services?
I think, and again, Martin can comment, but I think it's always, the key is always safety. So we bring in, everybody's notified. We have a very strict protocol in terms of how we respond to these types of incidents, who we communicate with, including first responders, local first responders, which we did in this case as well. The key, though, is that this is a live operation. It has certain risk, and we want to make sure that the protocol is well followed, just to optimize and make sure that we always protect the safety of the passengers and our crews. But Martin, maybe you have again more context to offer.
I think Olivier summarized really well the protocol that we have. In terms of response time, though, it's the same. As soon as we have an incident, like our team are deployed to reach the site. And once we're deployed, like there's an assessment of the situation that is made. And based on that assessment and the situation that we have, this is when we elaborate the next phases of the plan. In a case like the derailment that we have, because of the weather, because of the difficulty to access the site, because of where it was involving a passenger train as well. Some protocol that were decided to make sure that the safety of the people, but also the passenger train will be at the priority.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Guimond.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guimond.
Next, we have Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses appearing today. Welcome to Transport Committee. First of all, this storm played a major part, obviously, and there was a combination of factors that led to this challenging time for Via Rail and for CN and others. There was, an advance warning in the forecast. So, knowing that, what steps did CN take to prepare for potential consequences that might result from this incoming weather?
I think we have, like I said, very strict protocol. We have winter protocols as well. We have a very rigorous response structure, if you'd like, and we prepare. We deal with winter every year. We prepare for winter every year. This was an extraordinary situation. I think you've heard the VIA CEO a couple of weeks ago testified that this was a once in a 25-year event for VIA. And so these come with their unique challenges, but we're equipped to respond to this. It will impact the timeliness of our response, just because if you look at the conditions of the road and the time it took to bring the equipment under those conditions, the lack of visibility will force us to take extraordinary precautions to make sure that we protect the safety of everyone. But we are prepared, and we have robust protocols to respond to these situations. Martin, again, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, and thank you, Olivier. In terms of preparation, when we know that a specific source storm will arrive, there's a planning that it's all done, knowing in which department, who's on duty, who's going to cover. We also have like a regular patrol that goes on our track to inspect the condition of our rail, but also the conditions of like trees, is anything that has the storm evolve, is there anything that is impacting us, impacting the fluidity of the network? So we have people on duty, on site, that patrol the corridors and reports if they see anything, and try to be proactive as well in preparation of any snowstorm.
Yeah, and I'm assuming, of course, being proactive means that currently CN, obviously following this difficult period, would be undergoing a review of emergency procedures. So have you done that in preparation, just in case this thing ever happened again?
Yes, and you're absolutely right. Thank you for the question. We do, every incident is reviewed after the fact to try and see what we can learn, what lessons we can learn, what improvements we can make to operations and response. In this case, our chief operating officer and Mr. TRAN actually met with VIA's CEO and their chief operating officer a few weeks ago to discuss, to kind of do a postmortem and assess what could be done differently. And we've already identified some, opportunities from a communication standpoint to just have a better communication protocol. We've also agreed to provide VIA with access to some of our systems so that they could get a better sense and kind of as events unfold as to what's going on the ground, which will help them hopefully manage their own communications at their end.
Yeah, and so how long was it before CN became aware of disruptions to its rail network that would affect the VIA passenger trains?
Martin?
Normally within the next 30 minutes, like we're all aware, in this case, within 30 minutes, we even deployed some of our engineering team to go on site. In this case, though, like because of the weather and the type of snowstorm that impacted us with all the road closures, it took us a little bit longer to arrive on site, but within 30 minutes, the teams was deployed to try to get access to the site. And within the next hours, like they were on site trying to assess the derailment and the impact of the network that we had in this case.
So given that, I guess how long of an interval was there between when the problem was identified and when VIA was informed and Transport Canada? How were they informed?
I can speak to the Transport Canada piece, and maybe Martin can speak, or Mr. TRAN can speak to notification to VIA. We were in communication with the minister's office basically minutes after we became aware of the situation, and we stayed in contact with the minister's office throughout the process from the 24th all the way up until the 27th.
Is there an established protocol for how and the kind of information is provided to VIA or to Transport Canada?
Maybe Mr. TRAN can speak to the VIA piece.
Thank you, Olivier. There is a protocol whereby we communicate with VIA. Our operations centers are, if you will, tied at the hip. And as soon as there's anything that may impact their trains, we give them as much forewarning as possible so that they can advise their customers and let them know what's going on with the infrastructure. And so, the success of their service and the success of our service to them is the exchange of this information in a timely fashion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers, and thank you, Mr. TRAN. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Laval.
Next, Mr. Barcelou-Laval, you have 6 minutes. Mr. Guimont, Mr. TRAN, and Mr. Shook, thank you for being here today. It's much appreciated. I must admit I was very disappointed that the last time when we had our meeting early in January to do the autopsy of the events, CN had not been in attendance, and perhaps you could explain your absence. With pleasure. Thank you for the question. The invitation we received coincided with a board meeting for financial issues. It was a date decided on a long time in advance. We said we'd work with the committee to find new dates. Another thing I want to underscore is before we were even invited to appear, we had submitted to the committee our summary of significant facts to help the committee with its work. Thank you very much. There are Via Rail representatives who testified that that communication had been difficult between CN and Via Rail, and that it's not every day that you have to coordinate in the type of storm that was experienced. So were there any lessons learned? Are there any issues on your side that you think need to be improved? Thank you. Definitely. There are always some issues that were due to the extraordinary extreme storm. It's always difficult to communicate immediately to help VIA manage the expectations of its passengers immediately. And of course, to do it when we have a sufficient number of facts to give rise to expectations that we cannot address. In this case, we communicated quickly with VIA, and we adapted our communications modulated expectations based on the conditions we encountered in the field. That said, there is always opportunity to improve communications. We've discussed this with VIA, centralizing communications on our side, on VIA side, that there be one point of contact, clear messaging. And this is something we're working on now with VIA. Another thing we identified is that in regard to access to our systems so that we can see in real time what is happening on the network and to be able to help VIA manage passenger expectations. Thank you for that answer. Another question in regard to these same events. There were communications between CN and VIA, the communication you sent to our committee. Now, in terms of CN's public communications, I believe there are very few. And what explains that? Is this an internal strategy, or is this because you needed time to coordinate? I'm sure there's a journalist who would have been interested, had their questions, and the public as well. Thank you. You raise a good point. Generally, in these cases, and perhaps TRAN, my colleague, could comment on this, but there's the aspect of communications with passengers, and that's VIA's turf. We don't want to play in their sandbox. On the other hand, you are right. We did communicate what we could communicate, but it was a situation that was constantly evolving. So there's always a risk of communicating communications that may not be very exact because the situation is volatile and evolving. But your comment is reasonable, and we will certainly reflect on this internally. I don't know if my colleague would like to add. Thank you, Olivier. Yes, Chair, if you will. I would like to add that in regard to our infrastructure, we do regular updates. We have made progress, and tracks were reopened. We did at CN take the necessary measures, but to reiterate what Mr. Schuck said, the primary responsibility to communicate with passengers is Via Rail's turf. Thank you. Another question. An incident occurred on a track. A tree fell on the railway line, and this is the incident that created the problems. But when was the last time you inspected that section of the railway track? Martin. Thank you, Olivier, and thank you for that question, Mr. Chair. I don't have that information for you. Our tracks are inspected based on a well-established protocol. There are inspections that are also done, visual inspections done by our employees, but we also use given technology to increase the number of inspections done when trains are circulating on the tracks. But I don't have the precise information as to the date of the last inspection done on that segment of the track. Certainly, I will be able to look into that and provide you with the information. Might I please add? No, unfortunately, there's no time left. Thank you.
Backrack, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the gentleman from CN for being with us today to answer our questions about what occurred over the holiday period and some pretty troubling events that left a lot of passengers in a very difficult situation. And I'm a little bit surprised by some of the comments, especially around the severity of events or the severity of conditions. This is similar to what we heard from the airports at one of our previous meetings, that they didn't have contingency plans for the meteorological conditions that they experienced. In this case, it was the rate of snowfall. And so I'm curious, in the case of this incident, and you mentioned that you figured it was a 1 in 25-year event, which to me doesn't seem like a terribly improbable occurrence. I'm curious what the specific conditions that made it so extraordinary and challenging were, because you run trains in all sorts of weather conditions. I'm from northern British Columbia. You know, I know CN operates trains in cold weather and lots of precipitation and all sorts of other conditions. What was the confluence of events that made this particularly challenging?
Thank you. Martin, do you want to?
Yes, Merci Olivier. Thank you for the question. So we already spoke about the weather. Like, what makes it difficult for us is when there's an incident like this, we need to access the site. As we know, like some of the road and the major highway in Ontario, like some of the 400 series were closed at some point. On top of like accessing the location of the derailment itself and the location of it was extremely difficult. The derailment occurs really close to a creek with a narrow passage from a bridge to access the derailment site. We've got to remember that that derailment is involving two trains. There's the cars of 122 that came in contact with the locomotive of the train 305. So both track at the time were having cars and locomotive derail on that track. Normally, when we access a site to be able to remove a derailment really quickly, we use all the space that we have. In this case, we were working in a really, really restricted area. As an example, normally, we use also contractors, not only people from CN to support us. Normally, we can use the contractors and the heavy equipment that they have and position it at the site so we can start working in parallel. Because of the location also of the derailment, we were forced to bring one of the heavy equipment at the time to do their portion of the work and remove it and bring the other one. We could not use even our track to use it as a space because there was another train that was derailed on it. So the location of it, the fact that there was dangerous goods involved in there, the fact that we're in proximity of a creek, we had a really narrow space to be able to access the point of the derailment, make it much more complicated. And of course, like the weather, as we spoke earlier. So when you put all of that together, the compounding effect of each others, that's what created. Just want to point out though that our people, once inside, like we've worked 24 hours, we work nonstop. Not only the people of CN, but also our contractors that did a great job supporting us, but we worked 24 hours nonstop to reestablish the network in our fluidity as fast as we could in this situation.
What were the dangerous goods on board that train?
There was the dangerous good was on the what we call the intermodal train. It's in a containers. The name of the product is Pyridine, Paradigm. Sorry if I don't pronounce it properly in English. Okay, it's a type of like a liquid similar to fuel and a diesel. What's important to note is that CN we have a group that we call our dangerous group. Our employees, our officers working in that group are specifically trained in those type of situation. They were, of course, deployed on site during the derailment. They also work with the local fire department. They assessed the situation, and because in this case there was no breach, no leak, and with the cold temperatures, it was decided that there was no threat for public safety. So in a situation like this, we also have to wait, and they tell us which angle or how we can manipulate those type of products. So that was the product on that train that day.
So, Mr. Guimont, there are videos from passengers on board the Via train that showed other freight trains being prioritized following the clearance of the derailment. Given how long passengers were stuck on the tracks, why did CN choose to prioritize the movement of freight trains before giving these passengers respite from their situation?
I understand the perception, and again, like we're very sorry for the impact that the passengers of Via suffered during the holidays, and I understand the perception. When we have though a derailment, what's important to understand is there's no prioritization of the train. So when we fix a derailment, the first thing that we're looking at is to restore the network and make it fluid. So what we do is we don't prioritize. We have to go with the backlog traffic that has been stopped from both sides of the derailment. So the first thing to be able to re-inject train on the network is to make sure that the actual train that are blocking the network are able to move. And once this is done, then after that, you can re-inject train. So in this case, it's not, and I may understand like the perception of the people when they're seeing that, but if you have a bottleneck and you got a train east and west side that are there and we're also stuck, the first thing that you have to do after a derailment and when you reopen your network is be able to move those trains. Otherwise, you are not really able to re-inject train after that.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Guimont, and
Thank you very much.
Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses from CN. So you indicated that you were in touch with the minister's office, but I'm curious to know, did you hear it all from the minister and when? Because we know that, reportedly it took 13 days to contact one of the airlines, 19 days for him to contact your rail counterparts at Via, and he didn't contact either of the three largest airport authorities at all. So did you hear from the Minister of Transport himself, and if so, when?
We were not in contact with the minister himself directly. We've been in contact with the deputy minister, his chief of staff, and their team on a constant basis, and they informed us that they were keeping the ministers informed, but we haven't had discussions with the minister himself.
Okay, so during a major, meltdown of transportation in the country, the Minister of Transport was absent. Okay, so you indicated you had some commentary about an hour of services limit. And we heard from testimony at the January 26th meeting from Transport Action Atlantic, and there was that particular witness was actually on train 14 that was scheduled to depart Montreal at 7 p.m. on December 23rd. And in his testimony, he indicated that the train only made it as far as Rivière-du-Loup because they're informed the CN repair crews had reportedly called it quits for the day. So I'm just wondering if you could talk a bit about what happens in this sort of circumstance. I understand there's hours of service limits, but what are the contingencies in place, and is there not some flexibility in the case of an emergency?
Right. Thank you for the question. Just to be clear, in this case, the hours of service that we're talking about were those of the Via crews that was brought in to relieve train 55. So this is and Martin can comment on this probably way better than I can, but there is coordination and planification. So technically, schedules are planned in a way that you don't run out of hours. There's a transition that's affected, but in extraordinary circumstances like this one, it could play out in a little bit different way. Maybe actually, my colleague, Mr. TRAN, could respond to that question.
Thank you very much. There are issues related to hours of service. As you know, the government, actually Transport Canada rules actually mandate the maximum hours of service. And only in very rare exceptions are we able to use an emergency provision to work crews beyond the 12 hours maximum. And those are very clear in the regulation in terms of when they can be applied. Perhaps this would be an opportunity for the committee to review this regulation and to see if there aren't further situations where it may be appropriate to have exceptions apply.
Sure. So that's a good point. And so with the remaining time I have, I'd just like to ask one additional question. And you talked about the fact that you have identified ways to improve communication protocols and have followed through. So I'm curious if we could specify or itemize those just so we have that as we're in consideration of what needs to be improved.
Mr. Tran, maybe.
Absolutely. So what we've done is we had a top-to-top meeting between our chief operating officer and Via Rail's president and their vice president of train operations. We further agreed that we would set up a meeting between the senior leadership of both our operations groups. So that's our Operation Control Center and our Network Operations Center. That meeting will take place later on this month. And what we will do is we will review all of the emergency protocols, as well as the escalation process that we use between the companies to make sure that the right people are communicating at the right time as these situations emerge.
I mean, one of the criticisms throughout this of all the players in whether it was air or rail, of what we saw over the holiday period was a lack of communication to passengers and to others. So, would you say, given what you said about communication protocols and the reviews you're going to make, that what has happened was acceptable?
If you're talking about just strictly from a communication standpoint, first of all, no. Having passengers stranded in a train for as long as they were is not acceptable. How we go about, improving our performance going forward, like you're asking specifically on communication. Like I said, and like Wang said, it's we want to make sure that there's one point of contact so that we avoid multiple messages and create chaos where there should be clarity. And I'm not saying there was, but there is an opportunity to do this better, and that's what we're focused on. And we did communicate, but like I said, it was an evolving situation. So our message evolved as well, and there's no doubt that there's, like I said, we're looking for opportunities to make sure that message is streamlined, that there's one point of communication.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Shook. Thank you very much, Mr. Muse. Next, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for providing testimony today. I guess my first question really goes to the communications as well. And I want to start with, to clarify, how regularly was CN in communication with VIA during the disruption to service that occurred?
One.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So there are really two stages of communications when this unfurls. The first one is addressing the immediate emergency situation with Train 55, and that communication was ongoing, I would say. When it pertained to the derailment and the service disruption impacting the Kingston subdivision, the communication was less frequent, but as required. So as we're re-railing equipment and we know it's going to take 24, 30 hours, there's no point in keeping an open phone line between the two companies and just have that go without anyone speaking. So as we got more information, pertinent information that we were confident, then we would absolutely share that information. So on the first part, it was constant. On the second part, it was as required.
Transport Canada.
With Transport Canada, we had communication immediately following the accident. And then we were in regular communication throughout the 24th, the 25th, 26th, 27th, until such time as we had the tracks were reopened for traffic. I couldn't tell you specifically the exact frequency, but I could tell you that every single time we had a meaningful enough development, we would contact the minister's office, and they contacted us as well on their own just to make sure that they stayed informed about the situation and the upcoming development.
So CN was regularly providing updates to Transport Canada and to the minister's office about the progress, but also returning service to normal. That is correct? Because you've said you're every day from the 25th, 26th, 27th communicating with them. Can you once again, for the record, state that is correct? Go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I was going to say that is correct. I was actually personally in communication with the minister's office throughout that period of time.
Oh, okay, and you personally being in contact with the minister's office, you had an open line of communication and dialogue to discuss all the challenges we're hearing about today. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. I think that clarifies some of the false assertions made by one of my colleagues earlier this meeting. Do you anticipate we will have, I think this was a unique weather event, quite challenging for everybody in the transportation sector, from airlines to also rail. Are you better prepared for future events like this to occur with your communications protocol? You talked about a centralized one point of contact with VIA. Are you confident that if we ever have a disruption, again, due to weather or an emergency, that you're better prepared and well prepared to have all the protocols in place to deal with those challenges?
Yes, I would say we're definitely. And like I said in my opening statement, every incident, is reviewed so that we can assess opportunities for improvement. In this case, it was about communication, and we are working towards an improved communication protocol. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the big challenge we've seen, and it's been discussed by many of my colleagues, was particularly for passengers, is not having information or not being well informed. So constant and clear communication. And I hope there's some good learnings from what happened this season that will prevent further failure in communications from all parties to occur. I think that's the biggest learning one of the biggest for me is I think just good and constant communication is required, and I'm very grateful that you've provided and been in close contact with the minister's office and the minister to work together to find a solution to this challenging time. Thank you so much for your testimony today.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chahal. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur.
Next, Mr. Barcelou Laval. The floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Earlier, I asked questions regarding communications to the public, and the answer was that there are regular updates done, and these were provided. I'm not familiar with all the methods you'd use to communicate with the public, but I did check CN's website as well as your social media, CN's Twitter. I saw no communications for that period. And I wonder, was this planned? So what communications were issued to the public? And given the exceptional nature of this situation, can you explain what is done in your website and social media? Perhaps my colleague TRAN could comment. Our communications with regards to these situations are communicated to Via Rail, and it's up to Via Rail to communicate with their passengers. So what we do is we say, this is the status of the infrastructure. You do your plans, you communicate with your passengers, you communicate when you are going to resume service, what trains, in what order, when will the service start. Another question. Earlier I asked the question, when was the last time an inspection of this segment of the track was done. You weren't able to give me an answer, but could you tell me the frequency at which track is inspected? I expect there's a pre-established protocol, is there? Yes, and I let my colleague Martin answer that question, but I just want to see to it that you understand we go beyond the regulatory requirements. We also invest a great deal to enhance the quality of inspections. We've developed specialized equipment that allows us to identify any problems. So it's not just the frequency of inspections that has increased compared to regulatory, but it's also the technology used is more enhanced. Unfortunately, your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Barcelou-Laval. Mr. Baccarat?
2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our witnesses today began the presentation by apologizing, which usually to me indicates that something was not done properly. And so I'm somewhat surprised that CN's emergency response plans don't consider incidents like this in hard-to-reach places or consider contingencies in which transportation routes to the site of the incident aren't available. So my question is, if this exact set of circumstances were to occur tomorrow, how specifically would CN address the situation differently from how it did over the holiday period?
Martin, veux-tu...
Martin, would you like to answer?
Thank you, Mr. for the questions. If the exact same situation would have to occur with the exact same winter condition that we have, like I think the big learning over there is like assessment of the situation. Okay, so the site was accessible. We were able to access it about 300 feet away from where the derailment happened. We got to be understanding that our network goes across this country from Vancouver, in fact, Prince Rupert up to Halifax. So where our infrastructures are, there are a specific location that could be a bit more difficult to access. So in terms of like what could be done differently right now is definitely like accessing the point, accessing by road, communication with our contractors during that period as well. Our contractors needed some letter to be able to hit the road with heavier equipment. So we have to prepare the letter to make sure that hit the road with the heavier equipment with those conditions. So those are places that we're looking at of understanding where and how can we accelerate the response time. But again, this was a really specific derailment with multiple compounding effect.
Mr. Guimond, I'm a little bit confused because what you've said in response to my question is that you would access the site to assess the situation and you would access it by road, but you started off your presentation by saying that you couldn't access it by road. So what I'm wondering is what you would do differently. Would you use different vehicles? Would you use different roads? Like, how is it that you had so much trouble getting to the site to assess it? And how are you addressing those critical failures moving forward?
So let me clarify. The access of the site was, we could access the site. The winter condition and the snowstorm make it that it was slower for us to access the site. It was extremely difficult to get over there because we want to do it safely. We don't want our people and our contractors to go hit on a highway that is closed while the OPP was asking people to stay home. So when you look at all those conditions, this is one of the things that make it a little bit more difficult.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guimond. Malheureusement, il ne reste plus de temps. Next, we have Mr. Lewis. Mr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, witnesses, for coming before the committee this morning. This is starting to sound more like CN is like the airport where VIA is the airline. And when the airport shuts down, the airline takes the brunt of it, and everybody's upset with the airline. Now, I say that because I realize that CN owns the majority of the tracks, and VIA is basically at CN's mercy. And so my first question is, how far was train 55 from the closest railway crossing?
Wang, would you know the answer? Or Martin?
I don't know the exact distance, but certainly this is something that we could provide. It wasn't close enough for people to conveniently get off the equipment and, let's say, get onto buses if that's helpful.
To be fair to say, how close was your closest high rail vehicle? So the ones that drive on the road and then jump on the railroad track. How close would that have been to train 55?
I don't know the answer, but if this would be helpful to the committee, we can find out and report back.
The reason I'm asking that is it still completely confuses me as to why we could not have a crew in a high rail vehicle with a chainsaw on the back and a hard hat and some work boots and remove a tree and not have passengers sit for 14 hours. I don't want to talk about the derailed train that was causing the congestion. I appreciate that. What I want to talk about is why we had so many Canadians sitting on a train for 14 hours. And the reason I gets a little under my collar on this is I served as a firefighter for 7.5 years. And I drove through a lot of snowstorms, both in my personal vehicle and a fire truck to get to a burning house or somebody that needed CPR. And a snowstorm wasn't an excuse. We ran to the emergency. So I have a hard time believing that if this was a derailed passenger train, thank goodness it was not derailed, I have a hard time believing that a lot of emergency response crews wouldn't be there. And if I'm wrong in my way of thinking, then I'm very, very scared. We understand that the minister's office was reached, and as well as his deputy ministers, but the minister himself was indeed not part of the discussion. Can you tell me, as of today then, so a month and a half later, has CN sat down with the minister, not his staff, but with the minister?
Yeah. So maybe I'll answer your first comment or respond to your first comments. It wasn't so much to bring a chainsaw to the side, because that was actually done fairly quickly. But the location of the tree was deemed to be a hazard to the safety of passenger, and just cutting it the way you're suggesting could have been done in other circumstances, but not in this one without threatening the safety of the passenger. We would have needed a full boom truck to access the tree and do this safely, which is the reason why it wasn't done that way. Insofar as engaging with the ministers, we have not had discussions directly with the minister on this issue.
Okay, how much time left, Mr. Chair?
1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. That's remarkable, but thank you very much for the answer. I would have thought after a month and a half, and this being such a huge inconvenience for so many Canadians, he would have reached out. I guess that the last thing I would just suggest, and all due respect, Mr. TRAN, your point of, you said there is no point in keeping an open phone line between the two companies when you're working on something. I'm hoping you recall that, Mr. TRAN. I would suppose that I don't agree with that statement. And the reason I say that is when we heard testimony from VIA, their passengers were getting, I don't want to call it false information, they were getting old information because VIA was getting updates from CN that they would promise somebody an hour, and that hour turned into 3 hours. So they were actually sending out incorrect texts. Mr. TRAN, can you tell me if it was just something that I misunderstood, or when you speak about between the companies, full well knowing that VIA is responsible for their passengers, and is communication not of the utmost importance in a time like that?
Absolutely. I may have misrepresented that. What I meant is this. What I meant is when we're in an emergency situation dealing with the passengers on train 55, absolutely this line of communication has to be constant, and it was. When we're dealing with the removal of a derailed train and talking about when the line is going to open up again, we don't receive minute-to-minute information from the people on the site. So these activities actually happen on a longer timeline, and we try to provide VIA with accurate information on a timely basis. But this isn't continuous. This is something that's going to say, okay, let's have another update in 2 hours, because the estimated line clearance time will be 30 hours from now. And so they would not get updates every 15 minutes or every 10 minutes. They would get updates every 2-3 hours in terms of what it is. And then when we have a final line clearance estimate of when the line is going to open up again, then we sit together and we say, okay, how do we plan your resumption of service? How many trains can we take, and when can we take them? And when would you like running them? And what trains would you like to run first? And so, yes, there was a lot of communication. It's the basis for our success and for their success. I can't speak to the communications that they had with their own passengers.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tran. Unfortunately, we're going to have to end that line of questioning there. And finally, for today, we have Ms. Koutrakis. Ms. Koutrakis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just wanted to advise you that I would like to cede 1.5 minutes of my time to my colleague, Mr. Badaway.
Thank you, Ms. Koutrakis, and thank you, Mr. Chair. Having heard a lot of the testimony as well as the questions that are being asked, one of the things I'm most interested in is moving forward with an updated emergency measures. I guess management would be the proper word to ensure that all the partners in any given situation, such as the government, all levels of government, whether it be federal, provincial, or municipal, as well as emergency services, fire, police, EMS, and others that may be involved in the community, such as public works operations, planning, finance, and all those that would otherwise be included in activating an emergency measures team in any given instance. So I guess 2 questions to the folks on screen here. One is do you have an emergency measures plan, therefore something to activate when these instances happen? And then secondly, would it be advantageous to have more of a formalized national emergency measures plan updated so that therefore, once again, when these instances happen, that can in fact be activated?
Thank you for the question. I'll ask my colleague Martin Guimond, but I can assure you that we do have a national plan, emergency response plan. It is also reviewed on a regular basis, and it's informed by whatever experience we've had at the time of review. So whatever we've learned from this incident will find its way into that protocol. But Martin, if you may want to expand on this.
Merci, Olivier. Thank you for the question. I think Olivier summarized it. Like every single incident that we have at CN, like we try to, in a mindset of continuous improvement, we analyze what happened and we incorporate that in our emergency plan so we can learn from what we have. In terms of communications with local authority, I believe, Wang, you may be also in a position to explain how that protocol works as well from what we call the RTC and also the involvement of even CN police in our case.
Thank you. And so I guess ultimately my question would be to you folks, would it be advantageous for us to sit down after the study and as part of one of the recommendations that in fact be updated with the federal government, in particular with the Ministry of Transport?
Yes, absolutely. We'd be happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you to the witnesses for coming to testify before this committee this afternoon. In your view, would it have been a good use of anyone's time for CN to repeat information directly to the minister that it was already providing to Transport Canada officials and or to staff in his office, as you have already testified today?
I can't really speak to that specific question, but I can assure you that the way our communication went, it was clear that the minister was kept informed by his staff. At least that's what we were told, and so we felt, confident that the information we were bringing would find its way where it belonged ultimately.
Daily basis. I mean, regardless of what the minister or Transport Canada told you, or how this was impacting via passenger service, it's not as if you lacked incentive to restore normal service as soon as possible. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. I mean, first and foremost, we are committed, incented to respond, especially when there are passengers stranded on the line like this. We don't need anything more to motivate our actions. But you're absolutely correct. Restoring, this is what we do for a living. We move trains, so we have a natural incentive to do this as expediently as possible.
And when CN experiences multiple problems across its rail network in the same period of time, how well equipped is it to deal with them? I mean, resources at times, I would imagine, can be finite. So what I'm specifically looking for is how do you decide which problems to prioritize resolving first?
Martin, do you want to jump in?
Merci, Olivier. Thank you for the question. In terms of resources, we need to understand that CN is split by region and then by subdivision and by territory. So every territory has access to some of the resources that we have. And I think what's important to understand is, like, if we talk about our employees, we're well equipped to answer like multiple incidents at the same time. And when you start working at the railroad, there's a cultures within our company and our employees. They know that they're always a phone call away. So it's not because you are on your days off or on your weekend, or in this case, like, it's not because it was the holiday that people don't understand that it can be called at any time. So like our employees, our workforce, they understand that it's part of the reality of working in the industry, and they're pretty proud of like interacting pretty quickly to restore the network. So like we're well equipped in terms of resources and our employees.
Thank you very much, Ms. Koutrakis. That concludes the line of questioning for today, and in fact concludes the witness testimony for our study on air passenger protection regulation. I would like to thank our witnesses from Canadian National for joining us today, and with that I will suspend the meeting for 10 minutes as we move in camera. Merci.
Thank you.